She only wanted to win the Castley bake-off, but one biscuit hid a secret sharp enough to start a murder. This is Agatha Raisin and the biscuit that bit back. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. Cotswold mornings could be treacherous. They often began with a crisp promise of sunshine, only to turn sulky and damp by lunchtime. But on this particular April morning, Castley looked bright and deceptively cheerful. The village green sparkled beneath a pale blue sky, and bunting fluttered with far more optimism than the villagers who had put it up. Agatha Raisin strode across the grass like a woman battling invisible enemies, trenchcoat flaring behind her, chin set at an angle that suggested she was prepared to win something, anything, if only fate would give her the chance. The annual Cotswold Charity Bake-Off had transformed the green into a modest battlefield. Stalls lined the perimeter, kettles hissed in the tea tent, and children darted around sticky with jam. The WI marquee dominated the centre, a great striped thing that seemed to hum with self-importance. Agatha marched towards it with the air of a general inspecting troops. She had spent the entire previous evening removing the supermarket labels from 3 packets of shortbread and placing them carefully into a biscuit tin lined with wax paper. She told herself it was harmless cheating. Everyone in Castley cheated in spirit. Agatha was merely more efficient at it. Besides, last year's quiche debacle still hung about her like a faint odour. She needed redemption. Inside the tent, warmth and gossip swirled like competing draughts. The scent of butter, sugar, and ambition coated the air. Doris Simpson, polishing a display tray, murmured, "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," in the particular tone villagers reserved for scandal-prone neighbours. Agatha ignored the tone, adjusted her fringe, and scanned the competition table. Then she saw her. Polly Tasker. Polly stood near the centre, tall and willowy, the sort of woman who made cardigans look aristocratic. Her biscuit display resembled miniature works of art. Each lavender-iced round sat gleaming under a dusting of edible shimmer. Even the plate looked smug. Agatha bristled. Mrs. Blocksby appeared at her side with her usual calm smile. "Lovely morning, isn't it? Though the clouds look a touch threatening." "Let them threaten," Agatha muttered. "I refuse to be intimidated by weather or by over-decorated biscuits." Mrs. Blocksby followed Agatha's gaze. "Polly's quite talented. She joined the WI only last month. Very enthusiastic." "Overly enthusiastic," Agatha snapped. "There's enthusiasm and there's showing off." Mrs. Blocksby gave the gentle laugh of a woman who had known Agatha long enough to avoid direct disagreement. "Vanity can lead to trouble, Mrs. Raisin. Do be careful." "I'm always careful," Agatha huffed, which was patently untrue. Polly glided over with a smile that dripped honey and superiority. "Agatha, darling, your biscuits look rustic." Agatha stiffened. "They're traditional." "Of course," Polly said, eyes sparkling with false kindness. "So brave to keep things simple." Agatha imagined upending the entire tray onto Polly's pristine blouse, but she restrained herself. "Barely." Judging began. Mrs. Eunice Bentham, a retired headmistress and self-appointed guardian of good taste, approached the table with the gravity of a High Court judge. She sampled Maddie Chivers's ginger snaps first, nodding approvingly. She then reached for Agatha's shortbread, cutting it neatly with a small knife. Agatha straightened her posture. She braced for a grudging compliment. Instead, Mrs. Bentham yelped. The sound was sharp enough to still the tent. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Dear me, there is something metallic." Agatha's stomach dropped. A fragment of something shiny protruded from the bisected shortbread. A metal shard. The WI women gasped in unison, a chorus of village horror. Polly placed a hand to her heart in a performance so delicate it deserved an award. "How dreadful," Polly murmured. "Agatha, you really must be more careful." Agatha felt heat rising up her neck. "That wasn't in there. Someone tampered with my biscuits." A murmur ran through the tent. Doris Simpson whispered something to Maddie, who smirked. Mrs. Blocksby watched with soft concern. Bill Wong arrived shortly after, clearly summoned by multiple frantic calls. Bill looked around the tent with the weary expression of a man who had expected a quiet morning. "Right," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "What's all this, then?" "Sabotage," Agatha announced. "Someone is trying to ruin my reputation." "You don't need help with that," Maddie muttered, not quite under her breath. Bill sighed. "Mrs. Raisin, please, let me take the shard for analysis." Polly gave Bill a helpless shrug. "It's all rather unfortunate. One hopes it was merely an accident." Agatha's eyes narrowed. Polly's tone was flawlessly sympathetic, which only made it worse. Agatha wanted to fling a biscuit at her, preferably the one with the shard. A low rumble outside signalled the weather's betrayal. Rain began pattering against the tent, soft at first, then insistent. The atmosphere sagged. Agatha felt it echoed her humiliation far too accurately. Bill shepherded Mrs. Bentham away, encouraging the WI to continue the fete. Agatha gathered her dented pride and biscuit tin, muttering under her breath. Mrs. Bloxby touched her arm lightly. "Try not to let this upset you too deeply." "Too late," Agatha said. "My biscuits have been weaponized." She left the tent with her chin high, refusing to let anyone witness her mortification. The rain had turned steady, slicking the grass and making the green shine like polished jade. Agatha stomped through puddles with theatrical fury. She hated being laughed at. She hated being suspected. And above all, she hated being shown up by a woman whose icing looked professionally smug. By the time she reached her cottage, her coat was spotted with drizzle, and her mood had sharpened into something vengeful. She fumbled for her keys, muttering, "If anyone thinks they can frame Agatha Raisin, they've got another thing coming." Hodge was waiting on the windowsill, tail flicking with a mixture of disdain and expectation. Agatha pushed open the door, dropped her tin on the kitchen table and glared at her cat. "Don't look at me like that. You would have cheated too." Hodge blinked slowly, which seemed to confirm her suspicion. As she removed her coat, a movement outside caught her eye. Across the lane, a figure stood half obscured by a hedge. Agatha glimpsed the outline of a person watching her, not moving, just observing. A prickle ran down her spine. "What now?" she muttered. She stepped to the door and peered out, but the figure slipped away before she could get a better look. Only the hedge remained, still, dripping, and giving nothing away. Agatha closed the door, irritation melting into curiosity. Someone had tampered with her biscuits. Someone had watched her walk home, and someone in Carsley clearly thought they could outsmart her. Agatha Raisin lit a single cigarette, inhaled once and allowed herself a thin smile. "We'll see about that." Carsley woke the next morning with the smug energy of a village that had acquired fresh scandal. Sunlight drifted over the Honeystone cottages, giving the illusion of peace, but Agatha Raisin knew better. Trouble clung to her reputation like lint. She stood at her bedroom window, peering through the lace curtain, and scowled. 2 WI ladies were loitering at her gate. Their heads were bent together in conspiratorial delight, as though discussing a plague that had hit someone else's chickens. Hodge sat on the windowsill, tail twitching in judgment. Agatha glared at him. "Don't start. I've had enough criticism for 1 week." Downstairs the telephone shrilled. She snatched it up. A breathless voice asked, "Is it true, Mrs. Raisin? Was the judge almost killed?" Agatha slammed the receiver down and stalked into the kitchen. Before she could pour coffee, the phone rang again. Then again. By the third call, she barked, "If anyone else rings about biscuits, I shall start charging consultancy fees." She hung up before the caller could respond. A knock sounded at the back door. Agatha froze. She opened it to find Doris Simpson standing there with a bucket and mop. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," Doris said with a bright smile. "Thought I'd pop in and check the floors." "The floors are fine," Agatha replied, narrowing her eyes. "Oh, I don't mind. A spotless house lifts the spirits." Agatha folded her arms. "Or a juicy piece of gossip." Doris blushed but didn't deny it. She set to work, humming like a woman who had already heard half the story and expected the other half to walk into the kitchen at any moment. Before Doris could extract anything useful, the doorbell rang. Agatha marched to the front hall, muttering threats. She opened the door to Bill Wong. "You look cheerful," Agatha said. "Has the press started calling you the Biscuit Detective?" Bill sighed. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. Bill placed a small evidence bag on her kitchen table. Inside lay a broken sliver of metal. "It's from a nail file," he said. "Not machinery. A personal grooming item. Something you might find in a handbag." Agatha's mouth dropped open. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Does the entire village think I planted it for attention?" "Some think it," Bill admitted. You have, on occasion, created a bit of drama. I do not create drama. Drama follows me, like a stray dog with no manners. Bill gave the weary smile of a man who had known her for years. Agatha, someone might have slipped it into the tin, or it genuinely broke off by accident. We can't rule anything out yet. I can, Agatha snapped. Polly Tasker. She's been smug since the moment she arrived. She probably sharpened her nail file specially. Bill raised an eyebrow. That's not quite evidence. It's instinct, she said. Which is not evidence, he repeated. Agatha made a sound that was halfway between a snort and a growl. Bill left soon after, leaving her to fume while Doris pretended to scrub the already clean skirting boards. Agatha escaped to the Red Lion before lunchtime, deciding that coffee served by someone else might restore some dignity. The interior glowed with warm, mellow light. A small fire crackled in the grate. The scent of beer and baked bread settled her nerves. She ordered a coffee strong enough to wake the dead and took a seat by the window. A familiar drawl floated over her shoulder. I hear you've caused quite the stir, Aggie. She refused to turn. Charles, if you are here to gloat, I am not in the mood. Charles Fraith slid into the seat opposite her with effortless charm, his tweed jacket immaculate and his expression far too amused. I never gloat, I merely observe human folly. Meaning mine, she snapped. Not exclusively, he said, smiling. But yes, you do make it tempting. I hear Polly Tasker trounced you rather spectacularly. Agatha glared at him. She is up to something. Nobody ices biscuits that neatly without a sinister motive. Charles chuckled. I think she just enjoys winning, a trait you share, if I recall. Winning is healthy competition. Her display was an act of war. Before Charles could reply, the pub's telephone rang behind the bar. Fred the landlord shouted, Agatha, call for you! Agatha groaned. Oh, what now? She crossed the room and picked up the receiver. Roy Silver's voice shrieked down the line. Aggie, darling, you're in the paper. Local woman's biscuit nearly kills retired headmistress. It's marvellous publicity. Roy, I am not available for commentary. But they've called you notorious. Isn't that fabulous? Agatha slammed the receiver down and returned to Charles with a face like a threatened thunderstorm. Roy, Charles asked mildly. He finds my humiliation entertaining. As do most people, Charles said kindly. You do it with such style. She was about to throw her coffee at him when something outside caught her attention. Across the lane, Polly Tasker's cottage sat quiet, curtains drawn. A faint shadow moved behind them. Agatha frowned. She's home during the day? Charles shrugged. Maybe she's polishing her trophies. Evening crept in with a cold blue sky. Agatha stood at her front window, arms folded, watching Polly's house. A soft glow flickered behind the curtain, odd, uncertain, as though someone moved with a candle or small torch. Curiosity tugged at her. She slipped into her coat, ignoring Hodge's disapproving stare. She crossed the lane quietly. The light inside Polly's sitting room darted again. Agatha crept closer, her shoes crunching on gravel. She paused by the garden gate. Raised voices reached her. Polly's tone was sharp, urgent. A man's voice responded, low, angry. Agatha strained to catch words but heard only fragments. You promised, and not now, followed by a sharp thud. Agatha gasped. She pressed forward, but the voices died. The cottage fell silent. She hesitated. If she knocked, she risked looking foolish. If she walked away, she might miss something vital. Agatha Raisin hated missing anything. She crept closer and peered through the crack where curtain met window frame. She saw only a sliver of movement, Polly's silhouette passing briskly across the room. Then the light went out. Agatha stepped back, heartbeat quickening. Someone had been inside with Polly, and judging by the argument, it was not a friendly visit. She hurried home, muttering, Bill will want to hear every detail, even if he pretends he doesn't. Inside, Hodge sat waiting on the sofa, tail curled around his paws like a judge preparing to pass sentence. Agatha collapsed onto the armchair. Don't look at me like that, she told him. I'm investigating. Hodge blinked with deep skepticism. Agatha rose, made tea and paced the living room. She rehearsed what she'd say to Bill in the morning. Perhaps she'd casually mention overheard arguments, mysterious shadows, possible threats. Nothing too dramatic. Well, not overly dramatic. She settled into bed much later, still irritated at the universe. Outside, the lane lay quiet, hedgerows whispering faintly in the breeze. Agatha closed her eyes with a final huff, convinced she would sleep poorly. She did. Carsley had seen trouble before, but nothing that began with iced lavender biscuits and ended with a body on a kitchen floor. By mid-morning, the village felt drawn tight as a wire. Word had travelled astonishingly fast, even for the Cotswolds. A murder always had a way of waking the village earlier than any church bell. Agatha arrived at Polly Tasker's cottage breathless and cross, an unfortunate combination that made her look as though she had run from a fire only to find another waiting for her. She pushed through the cluster of WI ladies who hovered near the front gate like anxious hens. Mrs. Blocksby stepped forward, pale but composed. "I'm afraid it's true," she murmured. "I found her in the kitchen." "How?" Agatha demanded. "What happened?" Mrs. Blocksby shook her head. "I only came to return a book. I knocked and, well, the door was ajar." Agatha didn't wait for permission. She slipped past her and entered the cottage, ignoring Bill Wong's exasperated groan as he followed behind. The interior smelled faintly of lavender, sugar, and something darker. Burnt sugar, perhaps. The scent clung to the walls in a way that made Agatha's skin prickle. She walked into the kitchen and stopped. Polly lay face down, one arm stretched as though reaching for the counter. Beside her lay a plate of lavender biscuits, identical to those that had humiliated Agatha at the fete. One biscuit sat half-eaten, crumbs scattered like pale confetti on the tiles. Bill touched Agatha's elbow gently. "Please don't touch anything." "I know the procedure," she snapped, leaning in anyway. "Oh, Bill, look, there's a hole in the icing, just there, a puncture." He crouched and frowned. "It does look like something pierced the icing, but that's not enough for conclusions." "Oh, stop being sensible," Agatha grumbled. "It's obviously poison, and someone tried the same with my shortbread. I was the target yesterday." Bill gave her a dry look. "Agatha, I'm not saying you weren't embarrassed, but—" "Embarrassed?" Her voice sharpened. "I was framed, sabotaged, and now Polly's dead. You don't think that's connected?" Bill lifted his hands. "I'm not speculating until we have facts." "Facts?" Agatha gestured wildly. "There's a corpse and a biscuit. What more do you need?" Bill opened his mouth, closed it again, and sighed. "Please try to stay calm." "Calm," she repeated, but Mrs. Blocksby touched her arm and she quietened slightly. 3 figures gathered at the kitchen doorway as Bill took statements. Jeff Tasker, Polly's ex-husband, looking as though he'd swallowed a lemon whole. Maddie Chivers, her face tight with something between fear and resentment. And Gordon Bloom, the village handyman, who stood shifting his weight like a man guilty of at least something, even if not murder. Agatha eyed them each with suspicion. She never believed in coincidences, especially where food and scandal were involved. Jeff was first. A thin, wiry man with a pinched expression, he looked annoyed rather than devastated. "I've already told you," he said to Bill, voice impatient. "I haven't spoken to Polly properly in weeks." "Why?" Agatha cut in. Jeff glared at her. "Because she wanted more money." Agatha perked up. Money was always an excellent motive. "She'd been demanding extra support," Jeff continued, "threatening to, well, reveal things about my finances." He flushed. "That's between me and the Inland Revenue, thank you." Bill scribbled in his notebook. Agatha smirked. Maddie Chivers stepped up next, her ginger hair pulled back so tightly it appeared to lift her eyebrows. "I never liked her," Maddie confessed bluntly, "but that doesn't make me a killer." "You were furious she beat your ginger snaps at the fete," Agatha observed. "Yes, but I've been beaten before, haven't I?" Maddie snapped. "You didn't kill me when I beat your quiche." Agatha bristled. "That quiche was undercooked due to faulty ovens, not my fault." Maddie gave a humorless laugh. "Whatever you say." Finally, Gordon Bloom shuffled closer. His overalls were dusted with plaster and sawdust, though Agatha wasn't completely sure whether that was his natural state. He looked uneasy, eyes darting around the kitchen. "Gordon," Bill said gently, "were you near this cottage last night?" Gordon hesitated. "I might have passed by. Had a job up the lane, late shift." Agatha narrowed her eyes. "Funny. I heard voices last night. Raised ones. A man and Polly. And Mrs. Blocksby heard someone leave around midnight." Gordon's face twitched. "A lot of people argue, Mrs. Raisin. Doesn't mean they kill each other." "No," Agatha said, But lying to the police doesn't help. He flushed deeply. I'm not lying. I just walked past. Bill's expression turned thoughtful. Agatha's sharpened. After the questioning, Bill guided everyone out. Agatha lingered a moment longer, staring at the cooling biscuits. They looked so pretty, so innocent, exactly the sort of biscuit that could murder a person without breaking a sweat. She shivered. Someone here has a clever hand and a wicked imagination. Bill ushered her firmly outside. Let us do our job. But I can help, she insisted. I have insight. You have instinct, Bill corrected tiredly, which isn't the same. Instinct solved cases before. Yes, he admitted, usually by accident. She glared at him but said nothing. He meant well, he always did. But Agatha disliked being dismissed almost as much as she disliked being wrong. Later that afternoon, Carsley buzzed with gossip like a disturbed beehive. Agatha walked home along Lilac Lane, shoulders tight with frustration. The village's tidy hedges and neat front gardens looked irritatingly smug, as though nothing terrible had happened at all. Hodge awaited her on the kitchen table. Tail curled neatly around his paws. He stared as if demanding a full explanation. Don't look at me like that, she muttered, dropping her handbag. I didn't do it, though Bill seems to think I'm more capable of sabotage than murder, which is something. She boiled water for tea and paced the living room. Every clue gnawed at her. The punctured biscuit, the midnight argument, the suspects circling Polly like disgruntled bees. And worst of all, the growing suspicion that the biscuit meant for the judging table wasn't the only poisoned one prepared that day. What if someone had tried to harm Agatha first? She pictured herself collapsing dramatically in the WI tent, and for a moment she had the disorienting sensation of almost being flattered. Then she realized how absurd that was. If someone wanted me dead, she told Hodge, they could have chosen a more dignified method than a sabotage shortbread. Hodge blinked slowly. Even he seemed unconvinced. Her thoughts spiraled until frustration peaked. She marched to the front door to fetch the Evening Post, still muttering to herself. She bent to pick up a flyer and froze. Wedged beneath the door was a small folded paper, crisp, deliberate, out of place. Her pulse quickened. She unfolded it. 4 words stared back at her, written in blocky, heavy strokes. Stay out of the mix. Agatha inhaled sharply, the air cold in her chest. Well, she murmured, voice steady and defiant. Now it's personal. Hodge, seated regally on the stairs, gave a slow, unimpressed blink. Agatha tucked the note into her pocket. Whoever wrote that, she said, clearly doesn't know me at all. Carsley woke to a thin sheet of frost that glittered like ground glass. Agatha marched down Lilac Lane wrapped in her most determined mood, breath puffing like a dragon's. If Bill Wong imagined she would sit meekly at home after receiving a threatening note, he clearly had no understanding of her nature. Innocence, dignity, and reputation were on the line, and if she didn't defend them, the WI certainly wouldn't. The WI hall stood chilly and uninviting, its notice board flapping in the morning breeze. Inside, Agatha found Maddie Chivers stacking chairs with the intensity of a woman who had been criticized one time too many. Maddie looked up, expression sharp. "Come to accuse me, have you?" she asked. "Only of poor baking etiquette," Agatha said briskly. "But while I'm here, I want to know about you and Polly." Maddie sniffed. "She stole my recipes, claimed them as her own, sabotaged half my friendships too." She slammed a chair with unnecessary force. "But murder! Don't be ridiculous." "Everyone claims innocence," Agatha shot back. "It's nearly fashionable." Maddie folded her arms. "If I wanted her dead, I'd have used something quicker than a fancy biscuit." A clue, or a red herring wrapped in spite? Agatha couldn't decide. The bitterness in Maddie's tone felt real, but perhaps too real. Real bitterness didn't usually perform quite so loudly. Agatha left before Maddie's glare burned a hole in her coat. Outside, frost melted into weak sunshine. She spotted Gordon Bloom repairing a gate near the green. He worked with slow, heavy movements, as though carrying invisible guilt on his shoulders. Agatha wasted no time. "Gordon!" she called, striding over. "A word." Gordon froze mid-hammer. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin." "You were near Polly's cottage last night," Agatha said. "Don't deny it." Gordon's jaw worked nervously. "I help half the village, Polly included." "For money?" Sometimes, he admitted. She owed me a bit, never paid on time, always promising she'd sort it soon. Funny, Agatha said. You go pale when I mention the argument I heard. Gordon dropped his hammer. Argument? Yes, Agatha said. Voices raised. A man. Around midnight. He swallowed. Lots of people raise their voices, Mrs. Raisin. Not all of them end up dead the next morning. Gordon turned away, muttering something about finishing his work. A suspicious retreat, but also so obvious it almost felt staged. A thick red herring? Or a guilty conscience? Before Agatha could decide, a familiar voice drifted across the green. Aggie, need a lift? Or shall I get popcorn and watch the interrogations? Charles Fraith rolled up in his immaculate vintage convertible, hair perfectly tousled by the breeze. Agatha pretended not to be pleased. You're early, she said. You look like you're conducting your own manhunt, he replied. Naturally, I wanted front row seats. Drive, she snapped. Charles smirked and opened the passenger door with exaggerated courtesy, as her ladyship commands. They arrived at Jeff Tasker's modest house on the edge of Mercester. The curtains were drawn, despite the sun brightening. Charles rang the bell. Jeff answered with a nervous twitch of the eye and an odour of cheap aftershave wafting out like a warning. What do you want? He asked, eyeing them suspiciously. Information, Agatha replied. You argued with Polly. I argued with her many times, Jeff said defensively. She wanted more alimony. I barely manage as it is. She threatened to expose you, Agatha pressed. Jeff stiffened. Those were empty threats. She said things when angry. Such as, none of your business, he snapped. Agatha stepped forward. Polly is dead. Jeff's mouth tightened. Whether from guilt, shock, or irritation, Agatha couldn't tell. Look, he said, rubbing his forehead. She was difficult. She thought the world owed her. But I didn't kill her. I wasn't anywhere near her last night. And your alibi? Agatha asked sweetly. Home, he muttered. Alone. How convenient, Charles murmured. Jeff slammed the door before Agatha could retort. He smells guilty, Agatha declared as they walked back to the car. That's just his aftershave, Charles said. But I agree. Something is off. Agatha folded her arms. 3 suspects, 3 motives, and 1 woman dead from a biscuit. What a village. What a woman, Charles said with a teasing smile. You do realize, Aggie, you're enjoying this. I am not, she snapped, though it wasn't entirely true. The familiar thrill of the hunt had begun to stir beneath her indignation. Late afternoon brought them back to Carsley. The Red Lion glowed with warmth and chatter, the fire crackling away happily. Agatha pushed inside, attracting dozens of stares. Whispered voices rose like steam. There she is. Cursed she is. First the biscuit fiasco, and now Polly. Agatha stiffened. She hated pity. She hated scrutiny even more. She ordered a tea instead of a gin, an act of noble restraint, and took a seat by the fire. Charles sat opposite, amused by the swirl of gossip. They think I killed her, Agatha grumbled quietly. They think you kill everyone, Charles said. It's practically village tradition. Agatha shot him a look, then turned her gaze to the fire. She felt something unexpected. Sympathy for Polly. The woman had been smug, yes. Difficult, absolutely. But Agatha realized Polly's life had been messy. Debts, enemies, secrets. Not so different from anyone else trying to manage the village's tangle of pride and envy. She wasn't happy, Agatha murmured. Not really. Charles watched her with mild surprise. You're going soft. Nonsense, she snapped, but she felt a quiet heaviness settle. When she finally headed home, dusk had softened the village into gentle blue shadows. She unlocked her front door, stepped inside, and froze. Her biscuit tin, the one she had used for the shortbread, sat open on the kitchen table. The lid was bent. The biscuits were smashed into crumbs, scattered like tiny wrecked ships across the wood. Hodge sat nearby, tail twitching, as though guarding the scene. Agatha stared, pulse quickening. Someone was in my house, she whispered. The crumbs glittered faintly in the fading light, like evidence left by a petty, vindictive ghost. This, she said, voice steadying into cold resolve, is war. Hodge blinked approvingly. The next morning arrived bright and deceptively cheerful, the sort of fresh blue sky that pretended nothing dreadful had happened the day before. Agatha Raisin was not fooled. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold, staring at her dented biscuit tin as though it might confess something. Hodge perched on the windowsill, watching her with the patient disdain only a cat could manage. The phone shrilled. Agatha braced herself. "Aggie?" Roy Silver's voice exploded down the line. "I've booked the next train. Murder simply can't happen without my PR instincts present." Agatha groaned. "Roy, you are not a detective." "No, darling, but I am brilliant at narrative control. I'll be there by noon. Put the kettle on." "No, actually don't. I'll bring proper coffee." Agatha hung up before he could elaborate. She didn't need Roy turning this case into a West End production, but there was no stopping him now. She sighed, pulled on her coat, and marched toward the lane. She had questions for Bill, and she would badger him until he answered. She found him outside Polly Tasker's cottage, conferring with a forensics officer. Bill looked tired, which pleased her faintly. Misery loved company. "Well," she demanded, "what killed her?" Bill hesitated, then sighed. "Poison." "Obviously," Agatha said. "But how?" "Injected," Bill replied, "through a tiny puncture hole in the icing. Lavender oil helped mask the scent." Agatha blinked. "Injected? Into a biscuit?" "Yes." "That takes dedication." "Or desperation," Bill added quietly. Agatha folded her arms. "You're saying someone deliberately doctored her biscuits, which means Polly wasn't killed by accident." Bill gave her a look that suggested this was self-evident. "Whoever did it," Agatha continued, "had skill, or access to syringes, or both." Bill pinched the bridge of his nose. "Agatha, please don't," but she was already striding off, muttering about clues, motives, and idiots with access to medical supplies. Roy arrived precisely at noon, sweeping into Agatha's cottage like a multicoloured gust of London glamour. He brought a large bag of coffee, a stack of newspapers, and enough dramatic energy to power the WI hall for a week. "Darling," he said, kissing the air around her face, "you look dreadful. Murder does nothing for your complexion." "Roy, I swear. Now, what do we know?" he said, settling himself on her sofa as if he owned it. Hodge glared at him from the armrest. Roy glared back. Agatha grabbed her handbag. "We're going out." "Excellent," he chirped. "PR on the move." The chemist shop in Evesham smelled of menthol and ancient carpet. Behind the counter stood an elderly pharmacist with half-moon spectacles and the careful, watchful air of a man who had seen every kind of customer and trusted none of them. "Did Polly Tasker come here?" Agatha asked. "Yes," the chemist replied. "Bought syringes and essential oils, said she needed them for cake artistry." Roy whispered, "Who injects cakes? That's performance baking." The chemist continued. "Odd thing is, someone else came asking similar questions a few days later. A man, nervous sort, sweaty hands, kept glancing at the door." Agatha's ears pricked. "Did he give a name?" "No, but he paid in coins. Hands shook so much he dropped one." A nervous man. Gordon Bloom, Jeff Tasker, or someone else hovering at the edges of this messy puzzle. Agatha thanked him and swept Roy outside. Roy inhaled deeply. Small towns smell of secrets. "They smell of manure," Agatha corrected, heading back to the car. Returning to Carsley, Agatha made for the vicarage. Mrs. Bloxby answered with her gentle smile, though her eyes held sadness. "Poor Polly," she said softly. She had been troubled recently. She hinted she'd confided in someone, said she knew something that could ruin reputations. Agatha leaned in. "Whose?" Mrs. Bloxby shook her head. She didn't say, only that it was dangerous knowledge. Agatha felt a spark inside her chest, curiosity igniting like a match. "Someone wanted her quiet," Mrs. Bloxby sighed. "Be careful, Mrs. Raisin." Agatha nodded politely, though internally she was already charging ahead mentally like a bull spotting an unattended gate. She hadn't even made it halfway home when Charles Frith's convertible glided beside her. He leaned across the passenger seat, wearing that insufferably charming smile. "Hop in, Aggie. I've something you'll want to hear." Against her better judgment, she climbed in. Charles drove toward Polly's cottage. "I took the liberty of searching her bedroom," he said. Agatha bristled. "That's illegal, Charles." "Only if one gets caught." He reached under his seat and pulled out a slim diary. "Found this under her mattress." Agatha snatched it. The handwriting was neat, looping, confident. Most entries were ordinary, WI gossip, baking notes, annoyance at Jeff, until one page struck like a slap. He says he'll ruin them both. Must act first. Agatha read it twice, then a third time. Them both? Who? And why warn her? Charles slowed the car near her cottage. I imagine Bill should see that. Agatha's pride kicked in. Bill will only tell me to leave things to the police. He has a point, Charles murmured. Don't you start, she snapped, climbing out. Charles gave her a lazy salute and drove off. Agatha stared at the diary again. The phrase echoed. Ruin them both. A threat, a motive, a confession hidden in fear. She shoved the diary into her coat pocket and marched toward her cottage, thoughts swirling like startled birds. Night settled over Carsley with unusual stillness. The hedgerows rustled only slightly in the cool breeze. Agatha sat in her living room, Hodge stretched on the sofa like a lounging emperor. She should have felt tired. Instead, she felt wired, every sense alert. She replayed the day's discoveries, Polly buying syringes, a nervous man asking similar questions, a secret capable of ruining reputations, a diary entry dripping with dread. Someone in Carsley had been desperate. Someone in Carsley still was. She rose to fetch tea. The kitchen was dark, faintly cold. She flicked on the light and froze at the sound. A scrape, a quiet thud. Someone outside her back door. Agatha's breath caught. She stepped closer, heartbeat thudding. The back door handle twitched, once sharply. She slammed the kitchen light switch off, plunging the cottage into darkness. Silence. Then hurried footsteps, running away across the gravel path. Agatha switched the light on again, chest tight, anger rising like fire. Coward, she muttered. Absolute coward. Hodge appeared in the doorway, fur slightly puffed, tail lashing. He gave her a pointed look. Agatha exhaled, stroking his head briefly. Someone's afraid of what I'm about to find, she whispered. Hodge blinked, unimpressed. But Agatha Raisin knew this much. Whoever had fled into the night had just confirmed she was getting close. Very close. Carsley woke to a thin, listless drizzle, the sort that offered no drama, only quiet irritation. Agatha Raisin stood at her window, arms folded, watching the grey morning with the grim satisfaction of a woman who expected the worst and was rarely disappointed. Hodge sat on the radiator, warm and aloof, as though he had nothing to do with the previous night's attempted break-in. Agatha grabbed her coat and marched outside. Charles Fraith was idling in his convertible at the curb, roof still up against the drizzle. He gave her a lazy salute. "Morning, Aggie. You look murderous. Coffee?" "Drive," she snapped, sliding in beside him. "We're going to see Jeff Tasker." Charles raised a brow. "Excellent. Nothing like irritating a suspect before breakfast." Jeff Tasker's house was a picture of guilty haste. The boot of his small hatchback lay open, suitcases half stuffed and badly zipped. Jeff himself hovered beside the car, sweat beading at his temple despite the cool air. A faint chemical smell clung to him, sharp, medicinal, unpleasant. Agatha strode up. "Going somewhere?" Jeff jolted. "Work trip." "You didn't mention a trip yesterday," Agatha said. "I don't need to run my schedule by you," Jeff hissed, shoving a bag into the car. His hands trembled slightly. Agatha exchanged a glance with Charles. Chemical smell, trembling hands, sudden trip. Suspicious didn't even begin to cover it. "Funny thing," Agatha said. "The chemist in Evesham mentioned a nervous man buying syringes and lavender oils." Jeff froze for half a heartbeat. Lots of nervous men in Evesham. "Not one's connected to a dead woman," Agatha shot back. He slammed the boot shut, more with fear than anger, and fled indoors without another word. Charles leaned closer. "He's guilty of something." "He smells like guilt dipped in cheap disinfectant," Agatha muttered, "but he isn't half as slippery as he thinks." Back in Carsley, Agatha braced herself before entering the WI hall. She didn't expect support. She expected gossip. What she didn't expect was Roy Silver on a folding chair, holding court like a flamboyant monarch. "Ladies," Roy declared, waving Polly's diary, "you must understand, Aggie is the victim of a smear campaign." Every WI woman gasped in sync. Agatha charged forward. "Roy, what are you doing?" "Defending your honor," he said proudly, "and showing them the diary you hid from Bill." Agatha almost fainted. The hall erupted, chairs scraped, voices rose. Doris Simpson clutched her pearls with the enthusiasm of a woman who had waited her whole life for a scandal she could legally enjoy. "Blackmail?" Maddie Chivers breathed. Polly was blackmailing someone. "Well, it wasn't me," Doris said instantly, which of course made everyone glance at her. Agatha yanked Roy toward the door. "We discussed discretion." "No, darling, you mumbled something while digging in your handbag. I thought you were searching for mints, not scolding me." The gossip spread behind them like wildfire dipped in petrol. Bill caught up with Agatha on the green. His expression suggested he'd aged 5 years since breakfast. "Agatha," he said sharply, "the entire WI is now discussing blackmail motives because your friend waved evidence like bunting." "It wasn't me," Agatha insisted. "It was Roy." "The distinction is thin," Bill muttered. Then his tone softened. "Look, the break-in at your cottage wasn't random. Someone's scared of what you're uncovering. You're either close to the truth or irritating the killer." "Probably both," Agatha said. "I'm gifted like that." Bill rubbed his eyes. "Just be careful." Agatha felt a flicker of affection, quickly smothered by pride. "I'm always careful." Bill didn't bother answering that. Agatha's next stop was Gordon Bloom's shed on the edge of the green. The place smelled of oil, damp wool, and livestock. Gordon worked at his bench with the guilty air of someone who expected every knock on the door to be the police. "Morning, Gordon," Agatha said brightly. He flinched. "Mrs. Raisin, didn't hear you." Agatha glanced at the table. Syringes lay among his tools, slim, glittering, unmistakable. "Feeding lambs?" she asked lightly. "Yes," Gordon said too quickly. "You use syringes to help weak ones. Perfectly normal." "Of course," Agatha said. "Completely normal to keep syringes beside spanners." Gordon's face greyed. "I didn't kill Polly." "I didn't say you did. You're thinking it." "Everyone is thinking everything," Agatha replied. "It's a village. There's nothing else to do." He swallowed, looking even paler when Agatha described the puncture mark in Polly's biscuit icing. "Could have been anything," he muttered. "Or anyone," she added pointedly. He turned back to his tools, ending the conversation badly. Agatha stepped outside with her suspicions swirling. Gordon had shaky hands. Enough to drop a nail file shard, enough to puncture a biscuit, or just enough to panic around questions. Mrs. Bloxby intercepted Agatha on the lane. Her expression was kind but troubled. "I didn't want to worry you yesterday," she said softly, "but I saw someone at your gate the night of the break-in." Agatha's breath caught. "Who?" "I couldn't see clearly. Shorter than Gordon, broader than Jeff, carried something long and thin, like a tool, or perhaps a stick." Agatha frowned. "A tool? A needle? A manicure accessory?" "Mrs. Bloxby," Agatha said slowly, "did Polly gift WI women manicure kits this month?" "Yes," Mrs. Bloxby answered. "She brought a batch from a discount supplier. Everyone received one." A cold spark ran up Agatha's spine. Polly bought syringes. Someone else bought syringes. Someone panicked. Someone used a biscuit. Someone tampered with her biscuit tin. Someone lurked outside her gate. A long, thin object. A needle from a manicure kit. Agatha inhaled sharply. "The puncture mark matches the length of that needle," she said aloud. Mrs. Bloxby looked quietly horrified. "Oh dear." "Which means," Agatha whispered, "any WI woman could have had the tool used to kill Polly." Hodge would not be impressed, she thought. Agatha straightened, utterly certain of one thing. The killer wasn't just skilled or desperate. They were local. Very local. And she was closing in. Carsley basked under a rare, warm morning, the kind that fooled people into thinking the village had always been gentle and sunlit, rather than a nest of gossip coiled beneath the bunting. Agatha Raisin strode across the lane with purpose, handbag swinging like a weapon of justice. She had not slept well. Who could, after a whispered threat scratching across her answering machine at midnight? But her determination was sharper than ever. Her destination, the WI hall. Her mission, manicure kits. Inside, the hall buzzed with the usual chatter, cakes, council complaints, and the thrilling knowledge that someone among them might be a murderer. Maddie Chivers sat at a table polishing spoons with unnecessary aggression. Agatha approached. "Maddie, I have a question for you." "Of course you do," Maddie said, not looking up. "Your manicure kit, the one Polly distributed. May I see it?" Maddie finally met her eyes. "Why?" Because Polly's murderer used a needle of the same length found in those kits, Agatha said briskly, and someone lurked at my gate last night with something long and thin. Maddie sniffed. Well, that wasn't me. Mine's missing. Agatha stiffened. Missing? Yes, Maddie said shortly. Lost it on the WI trip to Bourton. Probably fell out of my bag. How convenient. Oh, do grow up, Maddie snapped. I'm not puncturing people's biscuits. Agatha watched her closely. There was fear there, genuine or well performed, hard to tell in Carsley, where theatrics counted as personality. Agatha left the hall just as a whisper trailed behind her. Raisin stirring trouble again. Another added, this'll end in flames. Agatha marched on, chin higher. At the Red Lion, the gossip chorus was already in full shriek. Agatha barely had time to sit before Doris Simpson leaned over. They say Polly was involved with someone she shouldn't have been. Agatha blinked. Like whom? Jeff Tasker, Doris murmured. Or Gordon Bloom. Or maybe that cousin who visited 2 months back, the one with the unfortunate moustache. That's 3 suspects and a moustache, Agatha muttered. Not exactly helpful. Oh, it's very helpful, Doris insisted, delighted. Where there's scandal, there's truth, usually. Agatha considered this. Beneath the exaggeration, something genuine often simmered. Polly had been hiding something for weeks. Mrs. Bloxby hinted as much. And whoever left lavender biscuits on Agatha's doorstep last night had very specific intentions. A shadow fell across her table. Charles Fraith slid into the opposite chair, looking as though he had been waiting for a dramatic moment. I've news, he said. You usually do, Agatha replied. Jeff's finances collapsed, spectacularly. He's in more trouble than a toddler with crayons near wallpaper. Agatha felt a spark ignite. So Polly really was blackmailing him. Threatening to expose his little creative accounting, Charles said. She wanted more money. He couldn't give it. Motive, Agatha murmured. But means? Charles lifted a brow. He strikes me as the sort of man who'd poison a biscuit rather than confront anyone. Agatha had to admit the image fit. But then again, so did Gordon's shaking hands, and Maddie's missing needle, and whoever left those cursed biscuits outside her door. Agatha rubbed her temples. Everyone in this village is exhausting. Yes, Charles agreed happily. That's why you love it. Evening settled over the village in soft, peach-coloured light. Agatha returned home, exhaustion and irritation wrestling beneath her ribs. Hodge sat on the garden wall, tail curling in greeting, or judgment. It was always hard to tell. Agatha's front step held a small white box tied with lavender ribbon. Her breath hitched. She crouched and opened it. Lavender biscuits. Perfectly iced. Beautiful. Sinister. A cold tremor ran through her. You must be joking, she whispered. Hodge sniffed the box once, recoiled, and padded indoors with a disgusted tail flick that said more than words ever could. Agatha stood frozen. These were not a gift. They were a message. A threat disguised in sugar. Her hand shook as she carried the box to the kitchen bin and dropped the biscuits inside with a clatter. She washed her hands twice, though the faint smell of lavender clung stubbornly. To distract herself, she switched on the answering machine. A hiss filled the room, then a distorted voice. You're next, Raisin. The message crackled to silence. Agatha stared at the machine, pulse hammering, anger rising as quickly as fear. Someone in Carsley was playing with her, stalking her, threatening her, stealing sleep from her. Coward, she muttered. Hodge leapt onto the counter, nudging her arm. She stroked him absently, grateful for the weight of something real, something unafraid. Then she straightened. Someone in this village was hiding behind lavender icing and manicure needles, and that someone had just declared war. You're next, Raisin, the message had said. Agatha Raisin smiled. Sharp, pleased, dangerous. We'll see about that. She turned off the kitchen light with decisive force, Hodge hopping down to follow her into the sitting room, tail flicking like a small furry sword. Carsley woke to a clear morning that looked almost innocent, a deceptive blue stretching over the rooftops. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table glaring at her telephone, as if it personally conspired in all the recent terror. She had barely slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside had kept her wide awake and furious. Hodge, sprawled like a warm loaf on the windowsill, seemed annoyingly relaxed. A sharp knock jolted her. She opened the door to Roy Silver, bright scarf flying. Aggie, he declared, barging in. I've brought pastries. We're investigating over carbs. You mean you'll eat and I'll investigate, Agatha muttered. Right on cue, Charles Fraith appeared behind him, hands in pockets, expression amused. Thought I'd join the summit, he said. You look like you're plotting a coup. Agatha herded them to the table, put the kettle on and glared at them both. Someone is trying to frighten me off the case. Roy gasped dramatically. But why frighten you? You're terrifying already. Agatha ignored him. The break-in, the biscuit tin, the note, the message on my machine, all of it was meant to scare, not kill. Someone nervous, someone messy. Someone local, Charles added. Agatha tapped the table. And someone who panics. Roy poured tea into 3 mismatched mugs. So we're hunting a coward? A coward with access to poison, Agatha said. Not the usual WI combination. Charles leaned back. Let's think of who panics under pressure. Jeff, Gordon, Maddie, or a fourth we haven't seen yet. Agatha straightened, eyes sharp. We start with confirming the chemist's nervous man. The chemist in Evesham recognized her at once. This time he seemed more willing to chat, perhaps encouraged by Agatha's glare. There is something else going on, he said. That nervous fellow bought nail care items as well. Files, buffers, cuticle tools. Agatha felt a jolt. Nail care? Yes. He said they were for a friend. Agatha's mind raced. A manicure kit, a missing needle, syringes, lavender oil, all pointing towards someone who fumbled and panicked. She thanked the chemist and marched Roy and Charles back to Castley with renewed fury. Jeff Tasker answered his door with the look of a man who had aged 3 years in 3 days. Oh, not you again, he groaned. Agatha pushed inside. Did you meet Polly the night she died? Jeff paled. No. Charles folded his arms. Lie better. Jeff collapsed into a chair. Fine. Yes. We argued. She wanted money. She said she'd expose my financial irregularities. You're fraud, Agatha supplied cheerfully. Jeff groaned again. I left her alive. She was furious but alive, I swear. Agatha studied him. His fear was real, but not the shrill, defensive kind of a murderer. More the hopeless panic of a man cornered by debt and pride. You smell of lavender oil, she said suddenly. Jeff looked confused. I fixed my daughter's toy yesterday. Glue. It smells sweet. Agatha sniffed again. He smelled nothing like the chemist's nervous customer. You're pathetic, she said, but I don't think you killed her. Thank you, Jeff replied weakly. On the lane they ran into Mrs. Bloxby. She greeted them with her usual warm calm, though her eyes held concern. Mrs. Raisin, something's been troubling me, she said. I didn't mention it earlier because it didn't seem helpful. Everything is helpful, Agatha snapped, though she softened the edge at once. What is it? Mrs. Bloxby lowered her voice. On the night Polly died, after you heard the argument, I saw someone leave her cottage. Agatha's heart thudded. Who? I couldn't see the face, but shorter than Jeff, bulkier, walking with a slight stoop. Agatha felt the world tilt. Shorter, bulkier, stooping, nervous. Gordon Bloom. His shaking hands, his evasiveness, his syringes, his presence near Polly's cottage that night, his flustered reaction when she mentioned the punctured biscuit. She exhaled sharply. It was Gordon. Charles nodded slowly. He does fit everything. Roy shuddered dramatically. A handyman with shaky hands and a biscuit problem. Horrific. Agatha pressed a hand to her forehead. He must have dropped the nail file shard into my biscuit tin at the fete by accident. He panicked, then tried to frighten me away before I connected the dots. Frantic and clumsy, Charles murmured. Yes, that's Gordon in a nutshell. Or in a biscuit tin, Roy added. Agatha shot him a look, but couldn't help the tiny twitch of amusement. Only Roy could lighten a murder case with a pastry. She turned serious again. Bill needs to know. They found Bill Wong outside the police station in Mercester, climbing into a patrol car. Bill! Agatha shouted, waving dramatically. Bill looked like he'd been dragged across 3 counties by his own patients. What now? It's Gordon, Agatha said. He bought syringes. He panicked at the fete. He was at Polly's cottage. Mrs. Bloxby saw him leave. It all fits. Bill's expression shifted, resignation, then alarm. He spoke quickly to the sergeant beside him, then froze. Where is Gordon Bloom now? He asked. Agatha blinked. Probably fixing a shed somewhere. Bill shook his head. No, we've been trying to reach him all morning. Meaning? Charles asked. Meaning he's vanished, Bill said grimly. Roy gasped. He's gone on the lam. Or he's hiding, Agatha murmured, stomach tightening, because he knows we're onto him. Bill slammed the patrol car door. If Gordon Bloom is our killer, he's scared and unpredictable. I'll alert the team. Agatha felt a quiet, sharp satisfaction, tinged with the unsettling sense that she was now deeper into danger than ever. Back in Castley, the village's warm afternoon hummed with deceptive peace. Agatha walked slowly toward her cottage, Hodge trotting ahead like a small, furry escort. She paused at her gate, scanning the hedges, the footpaths, the quiet corners. Gordon Bloom was somewhere out there, hands shaking, nerves frayed, fear rising, and she had just forced him into a corner. Hodge meowed once, as though urging her inside. Agatha took one last look around the lane. It isn't over yet, she whispered. And deep in the village, unseen, someone listened. A cold wind swept across Mercester, the sort that sliced straight through wool and optimism. Agatha Raisin stood beside Bill Wong's patrol car, coat wrapped tight, glaring at the bleak farmland stretching ahead. Charles Fraith leaned against the bonnet, hands in pockets, looking irritatingly comfortable despite the weather. This is where Gordon used to work, Bill said, shutting the car door. An abandoned small holding. The neighbour spotted movement last night. Agatha scanned the sagging barn, its roof half fallen, the windows dull with grime. Even from a distance she sensed the clinging scent of fear, or guilt, or both. Castley men had a habit of carrying their emotions like damp coats. He'll be inside, Agatha murmured, stepping toward the barn. He's too nervous to go anywhere farther. Charles followed her. Try not to get shot, Aggie. He doesn't have a gun, she snapped. He could have a rake, Charles offered. Agatha ignored him and pushed open the barn door. It creaked in theatrical protest. Inside, dust floated in thin beams of cold light. The space smelled of old hay, rust, and, unmistakably, lavender oil. He's here, Agatha whispered. A rustle came from the far corner. Gordon Bloom stepped out, hunched, shaking, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the cold. His eyes darted over them like a trapped animal. Gordon, Bill said calmly, stepping forward. No one wants this to get worse. Gordon backed into the wall. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. Agatha approached slowly. Then tell us. Gordon shook his head, rubbing his hands over his face. You won't understand. Try me, Agatha said. I live in a village where people argue about flapjack recipes. My threshold for nonsense is high. Gordon let out a broken, humourless laugh. He sank onto an overturned bucket, shoulders collapsing. I loved her, he whispered. Polly. I loved her for years. Agatha blinked. That had not been on her suspects list. Gordon continued. She never looked at me properly, not once, but I didn't care. I helped her with the garden, fixed her taps, fetched things from shops. She'd talk to me sometimes, about Jeff, about the WI nonsense, about wanting a bigger life. Agatha exchanged a glance with Bill. The rawness in Gordon's voice was unmistakable. Then she said she was going to expose Jeff's fraud, Gordon said. Said she'd do it during the fete, publicly. Wouldn't listen to reason. She wanted the drama. Agatha folded her arms. Polly did like an audience. She said Jeff deserved ruining, said she'd take him down and anyone who stood in the way. Gordon stared at the floor. I told her she'd destroy herself. Jeff would drag her through court. The WI would turn on her. She'd lose everything. Bill spoke gently. And you argued? Gordon nodded. She laughed at me, told me to mind my own business, said I was pathetic and clingy. His hands shook harder. I panicked. I thought, if she fell ill, she'd stay home. She wouldn't go to the fete. She'd calm down. Agatha's stomach tightened. So you poisoned the biscuit. Gordon nodded miserably. Just a tiny dose, enough to make her sick, not kill her. I injected it into the icing. Lavender oil hid the smell. I thought she'd only eat one. Agatha felt a strange mix of revulsion and pity. Love, desperation, foolishness, the village's favourite cocktail. Bill crouched beside him. But she ate more. 3, Gordon whispered. She never did anything halfway. When she collapsed, I panicked again. I ran. I didn't call anyone. I didn't think clearly. Everything just... He broke off, trembling. Agatha drew in a slow breath. Part of her wanted to scream at him. Part of her understood too well what loneliness could twist into. "And the nail file in my biscuit tin?" Agatha demanded. Gordon winced. "Accident. I had Polly's manicure kit in my pocket. She'd asked me to fix the clasp earlier that week. The file broke when I fumbled with it. It dropped. I didn't notice it fell into your box during the judging rush. When the judge bit into it," he swallowed. "I thought you'd think it was sabotage. I thought you'd blame someone else." Agatha stared at him. "You idiot," Gordon nodded. "Yes." "And the break-in?" she pressed. "I just wanted you to stop investigating," Gordon cried. "You kept asking questions. If you linked the nail file to me, you'd come after me next. I only meant to frighten you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why leave lavender biscuits at my door?" Agatha demanded. "To scare you." Gordon buried his face in his hands. "I thought you'd back off." Agatha felt a flicker of unexpected sympathy. "You really are a complete fool." Gordon nodded again, defeated. "Yes." Bill rose slowly. "Gordon Bloom, I'm arresting you on suspicion of manslaughter." Gordon burst into tears. Loud, wrenching sobs filled the barn. Agatha took a step back, heart tightening despite herself. She wasn't blind to the tragedy. Polly had been vain, ambitious, reckless. Gordon had been lonely, lovesick, and disastrously foolish. Together they'd created a storm no one could walk away from unharmed. Charles placed a gentle hand on Agatha's shoulder. She shrugged him off, but only lightly. Bill led Gordon out, his sobs echoing in the cold air. Agatha followed slowly, boots crunching on the frostbitten ground. Outside, the wind whipped her coat, carrying with it the faint smell of lavender and wet earth. "Agatha," Bill said quietly, pausing before Gordon was taken away. "Your meddling nearly got you killed. Again." Agatha lifted her chin. "Yes, well, life's boring otherwise." Bill shook his head, half exasperated, half relieved. "One day it won't be funny." "Not today," Agatha replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And probably not tomorrow." She watched the patrol car pull away, Gordon still crying inside, and felt a small, sharp ache of something like sorrow. Then she turned toward Carsley, toward her warm cottage, toward Hodge, who would undoubtedly judge her for returning late. "Another case cracked," she murmured, though the victory felt strangely hollow. But such was life in Carsley. Gossip, danger, tea, and unexpected grief, all baked together like an over-ambitious WI cake. Carsley breathed again. It was the peculiar breath a village took after scandal, half relief, half disappointment. Rain had drifted off at last, leaving the cottages rinsed clean and glowing faintly in soft sunlight. The air smelled of damp earth, warming grass, and the comforting clatter of everyday life returning to normal, or as normal as Carsley ever managed. At the Red Lion, the gossip circle had already moved on. Doris Simpson and her cohorts sat beneath the pub window, glasses of lemonade in hand, discussing the upcoming summer fete with spirited energy, as if murder had merely been a minor scheduling inconvenience. Agatha Raisin entered to fetch a takeaway tea. Conversation paused for a fraction of a second, long enough to acknowledge her, short enough to avoid admitting anything. Then Doris launched into a tirade about raffle prizes, and the moment dissolved. Agatha found Bill Wong at the bar. He handed her a small bouquet of supermarket flowers, carnations but thoughtfully chosen. "For not dying," Bill said matter-of-factly. "Please refrain from further biscuit incidents." Agatha tried to scowl but felt a warmth tugging at her mouth. "I make no promises." Bill shook his head with weary affection. "You deserve credit, Agatha. You kept going even when you shouldn't have." "You know me," she said lightly. "Stubbornness is my finest asset." "And the most dangerous," he replied, though he was smiling. She left the pub with a faint flutter in her chest. Compliments from Bill were rare creatures, best stored away like treasure. Roy Silver departed that afternoon in a whirl of scarves and melodrama. He kissed Agatha's cheek, declared her Britain's favourite chaos magnet, and promised to phone nightly with updates on London's social catastrophes. She waved him off, amused and faintly relieved. Carsley needed a breather after Roy's colourful presence. Charles Fraith appeared on her doorstep just after 5, leaning casually against the gate. "Dinner?" he asked, tone light, eyes hopeful. Agatha hesitated, a dangerous flaw. Her pride, vanity, and nervousness staged a brief but forceful argument inside her head. "I can't tonight," she said at last. Charles nodded with only the barest flicker of disappointment. "Another time." He strolled off, hands in pockets, looking infuriatingly charming as always. Agatha shut the door and instantly regretted it. Pride once again had outmaneuvered her. "Idiot," she muttered at herself. Hodge meowed from the armchair, stretching luxuriously as if to say he had expected no better. Later, Agatha settled on the sofa with a cup of tea. Hodge sprawled across her lap, warm and heavy in the most comforting way. The house was unusually peaceful, the kind of peace that arrived only after danger had been packed away and filed under village history. For a moment she felt something soft settle inside her, a mix of pride and loneliness, tangled together like poorly wound yarn. She had solved another case. She had faced threats, absurdity, and her own stubborn flaws. And yet, the cottage felt very quiet. She lit a cigarette, the small flare bright in the dimming room. Not dramatic, simply thoughtful. A habit of reflection more than rebellion. Hodge wrinkled his nose in disapproval. "Yes, yes," Agatha murmured. "I know." A gentle knock sounded, and Mrs. Blocksby entered with her usual serene smile. "I just wanted to see how you were," she said kindly. Agatha waved her in. "Fine, just tired." Mrs. Blocksby sat beside her. "These things shake us more than we admit. Pride can make people crumble, Mrs. Raisin, in more ways than one." Agatha snorted. "A biscuit pun?" Mrs. Blocksby's eyes twinkled. "Entirely accidental." They shared a quiet moment, warm and companionable. Mrs. Blocksby soon excused herself with a soft goodbye, leaving Agatha alone with her thoughts, the fading scent of lavender drifting faintly through the open window. Agatha scowled and shut the window with force. "Not again," Hodge purred as if satisfied by her decisiveness. The next morning, sunlight spilled cheerfully into the cottage. Agatha padded downstairs in slippers, feeling almost content. On the doormat lay a cream envelope with no stamp. She picked it up, brow lifting. Inside was a single note. "I hear you solved a murder. Perhaps you'd consider another case." No name, no address, just the promise or threat of more trouble. Agatha stared at the note, irritation and excitement blooming together like twin roses. Hodge leapt onto the table, tail flicking in perfect anticipation of chaos. Agatha Raisin allowed herself a slow, wicked smile. "Well," she murmured, "so much for peace." And somewhere outside, the village of Carsley continued its gentle hum, unaware that Agatha's next adventure had already begun.